Is your problem the how of business immigration or whether we should do business immigration?
In principle, it should be possible to design business immigration programs that actually work for both the people coming here under those programs as well as the overall Canadian population.
I agree that economic immigration is important for Canadian prosperity. I'm not sure if the business immigration is the most critical element of that economic immigration, but it is important, absolutely. Given the economic challenges right now that Canada is facing, perhaps it is the time to rethink business immigration and business immigration from a business lens, and really truly rethink not just in terms of how many seats in the levels plan, but it's more structural rethink is needed.
Who is in charge of giving us the best shot at a workable immigration framework? Well, that's IRCC. To the Yates report, it says IRCC is broken.
Anytime you talk about public service reform, you effectively run against the problem that you can't really get effective political buy-in to do a major revamp of the public service because it doesn't attract votes.
When you look at the SUV evaluation that I mentioned, and this is very important in my view for business immigration advocates, if you will, they need to realize that IRCC is an amateur in that business.
I personally think we need a Royal Commission on Immigration, even if it takes the time, because we need that sort of distance from all the day-to-day pressures, which is really hard to manage.
How do we tame that bottom line urge with public good interests?
That's why we need good government, and that's why we're having this conversation. All right, hello and welcome to another Catalyst Canada Roundtable. Today we have the honor and privilege of hosting two exceptional individuals who bring a wealth of experience, insight, and integrity to the conversation. In alphabetical order, they are Mr. Andrew Griffith and Mr. Ümit Kiziltan. Our time is short and there's much to explore, so I won't attempt to do justice to their full bios here. Suffice it to say that both Andrew and Ümit are long-serving public servants who, despite having formally retired, continue to serve the Canadians through thought leadership, public engagement, and deep policy insight. Andrew is the former Director General of Multiculturalism and Citizenship at IRCC and a prolific blogger on immigration policy. Catalyst Canada is a fan of Andrew's blog, Multicultural Meanderings, which effectively is an encyclopedia of Canadian immigration policy. And if you're not already following it, I highly recommend subscribing. Ümit most recently served as IRCC CDO, that's Chief Data Officer, and before that as Director General of the Research and Evaluation Branch. He remains one of the few real thought leaders, regularly sharing his insights and reflections on LinkedIn and beyond. We'll be posting links to both of their profiles and work, so please take the opportunity to connect, follow, and engage. Gentlemen, thank you, first and foremost, for your service to the country, both past and present, and God willing, for many, many, many more years to come. And thank you indeed for accepting our invitation to be part of this initiative.
Pleasure.
Okay, thanks.
Pleasure is all ours. Now, allow me to put a proposition on the table to kick off today's discussion. Canada's economic immigration framework is no longer fit for purpose. If we define purpose as economic prosperity, measured by GDP per capita rather than GDP alone, then it becomes clear. Selection is misguided, integration is broken, and integration, arguably the most important pillar, remains the afterthought. Reform is urgently needed. And because time is short, a strategic prioritization is critical. Within the broader umbrella of economic immigration, business immigration, that is programs targeting investors and entrepreneurs, represents the highest potential for our purpose. Therefore, it must become the top priority for reform. The cap must be substantially increased, and its administration and integration must not only be fixed, but reimagined. With that proposition, I will open the roundtable and I'll go in alphabetical order. Andrew, what do you think about this proposition?
Well, I'm always been a bit skeptical about business immigration. Partially that is driven by what the evidence showed in terms of previous business immigration programs, which really were not delivering the results that were expected. If you look at terms of income integration, it seemed that sort of the regular stream of immigrants who just came for economic purposes as employees tended to do better in the short and longer term than business immigrants who came. There was certainly a benefit in terms of real estate prices and luxury dealerships. But the overall approach of the sort of the classic business or citizenship by investment programs doesn't seem to generate strong results. And that's not only in the Canadian context, but most of the international studies that I've seen highlight that it's not necessarily the best effective. Now, within the general ambit of business immigration, there are some programs that may have been more successful, like some of the more targeted, talented or entrepreneurship programs. But Ümit probably knows some of the more recent research than I do. So why don't we see where Ümit is on this?
Yeah, I think the proposition, most of it makes sense to me, Siavash, like that we need a reform. There are, at least based on what we are seeing and observing, a number of areas where change is needed. That one I agree. And I also, in the overall proposition, I agree that economic immigration is important for overall, Canadian prosperity, as you put it. I'm not sure if the business immigration is the most critical element of that economic immigration, but it is important, absolutely. And I agree with Andrew too. In the past, you yourself, there have been a lot of documented failures of the business immigration program, not only in Canada, across the world, in fact. That one I can see. So I'm not that much convinced as Andrew that, it can't be fixed. Maybe that's not what Andrew said. We should make an effort to do it right and properly in terms of business immigration. But economic immigration overall also needs attention, like in terms of, select, Michael Scudder, others have argued, in many different ways, how to do it better in terms of picking high human capital economic immigrants and whatnot. I have always thought, I was there at the, right at the invention of express entry. We worked very hard. I was at the evidence end of things with policy colleagues. We thought we were almost about to do what these days many people propose as human capital, properly done, evidence-based economic immigration. But then later on, to be very frank, it has been kind of watered down by new inventions and additions, most of which I don't think were evidence-based. So today we have what we have in terms of express entry, which is quite different than when it originated, 2013, 14, somewhere there. So overall, I agree. But again, maybe we want to discuss more specifically business immigration.
So let's go to the disagreements. Okay, let's go to Andrew. Andrew, is your problem the how of business immigration or whether we should do business immigration? Because your skepticism, we can definitely talk about it. But before let's assume that we can do business immigration perfectly, and then we can define what's perfect, and then we can talk about that. With that assumption, do you still have a problem with prioritizing business immigration?
Well, no, I mean, in principle, it should be possible to design business immigration programs that actually work for both the people coming here under those programs as well as the overall Canadian population. However, to be a bit cynical about this, the problem is that the politicians at the political level tends to see somebody coming in with $1 million, $5 million as being a significant business investment. And so they get seduced by those figures and they become less interested in the kind of empirical analysis or the criteria that would actually assess whether that $5 million is actually going to mean anything in terms of hiring other Canadians, generating economic growth. So that's the challenge, is that the simplistic proxy that people use in business immigration, and whether it be here or, Trump's gold card program, is to bring the money, something will happen, something good will happen. So where I think business immigration has been more interesting is when it's and I haven't seen an evaluation yet, so I don't know how well it's working, but the talent-directed programs, the entrepreneurship programs, where you have people in the sector who help select it. It's not just government civil servants, but there's advice from the high-tech sector or whatever sector saying, yes, these people have a business plan or have a business proposition that is of interest. And that's, of course, harder to manage. Of course, just because a business organization, no matter how credible, recommends somebody, it doesn't mean there's not possibility for abuse. But I think that's still a more interesting proposition than just sort of saying, bring 5 million, hold it in the country for 5 years, and that's good enough.
Sure. So principally, you're on board in principle. But Ümit, I saw that in your counter to the proposition, you said you're not so sure if business immigration should be at the top of economic immigration, right? Because our argument is, hey, economic immigration, GDP per capita, everybody says for GDP per capita, you need innovation, you need capital, you need high skills, and these things come together beautifully in entrepreneurship if done right, right? So we're still operating on the assumption that we can do it right. So are you on board principally with this, that if, let's say, we're taking 500,000 a year of immigrants, 60% of which is economic. Out of that 60%, let's prioritize business immigrants because they have the highest potential for GDP per capita.
Yeah. So, I agree that they have I don't even know what we mean when we say prioritize. That's one thing, right? In terms of numbers, I don't think so because, economic immigration principal applicants will always be, in my opinion, much larger, that number, than business immigration applicants, primary applicants. So prioritize, I don't think you mean give them more room or highest number of seats, if you will, in the economic immigration.
That's precisely what we're saying. Increase the cap. That's what we're saying.
Sure.
We're saying if we want to take a few 100,000 economic immigrants, let's prioritize business immigrants by the definition that they should take the first line in. So they're like the red carpet immigrants, and then we go to economic immigrants that are coming to fill the labor gap.
Look, I mean, honest to God, if that is possible, let's say, one can put that on the table. But again, we will have to go back to your very first premise. You said, if we can do it right?
Sure.
And Andrew's starting track record failures, right? Maybe one should focus on that if we can do it right. I will put on the table, we don't need to go too much in detail, but I had known this particular program, and it matches almost 100% what you described in terms of your vision for business immigration, which is the startup visa. SUV started, it's a small program, yes, but it had all the elements, in fact, what Andrew was hinting at, because it is, and it still has all the elements, it is so grounded in the innovation sector, capital, investment sector. It has all the linkages to organic groups and sector representatives, if you will. It is a very well-grounded program. Started 2013, the first evaluation, I was as the head of evaluation. I conducted the first evaluation in 2016. We published it. Just last year, 2023, if you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend you got to read that evaluation. It puts on the table, in all its clarity, that the program actually, that program, if you take it as symbolic of what you have in mind, like in terms of business immigration with innovation, capital, organically linked to the Canadian already existing business community, it has people overseeing in terms of integrity of the applicants. It's got almost everything in terms of theory. But look at the evaluation where it's failing, right? It is failing in terms of defining success properly, collecting data, performance data. It's got a lot of integrity problems because roles and responsibilities are very ill. So I can go on and on around that 2024 or 23 evaluation, which is very similar to the earlier evaluation. So here, more than 10 years have passed since the design of the program. So one needs to ask, I know this is not where you want to go, given you the topic of your discussion, but this is where I think maybe Andrew and I, we are.
But that's exactly where we want to go. Because here, if we continue building programs that don't work, it's hurting everybody, right? Because I'm here as a representative of the business sector. I should be spending this time helping entrepreneurs come to this country and genuinely start, contributing to our economy. But here I am talking with you about something that we couldn't get right for 10 years. So I think it's of utmost importance that we think about how we can create programs that are not only good in design, but are also good in practice. Like Startup Visa program is one example, right? Design-wise, one can say, hey, this is a good program in design, but look at what's happening in implementation. Like, I'm a practicing lawyer and this is my niche, and I can tell you horror stories of these integration with the market, what these designated organizations, some of them, to be fair, that are doing to poor applicants, right? This is like extortion. I don't want to get into the horror stories, but let's go one step back. In design, for business immigration, first of all, let's just define categories. So we're talking entrepreneurs. We understand entrepreneurs for people who we want to come here and actively manage a business. So they're hands-on, right? And then we have passive investors. With the passive investors, we never wanted them to come here and get involved with the business actively, but we want them to commit to a certain investment amount. Let's stick with the entrepreneur. What does success look like for entrepreneurs? Let's go to Andrew. What do you think success looks like for an entrepreneur?
Well, I think success, in my lay understanding of an entrepreneur, because I've never been an entrepreneur, so I'm always a bit leery about that. See, for an entrepreneur, what you really want is see somebody who starts up a company or takes an existing company and takes it to the next level. And the next level means revenues, means employee, means, other impacts on the economy. So that's the idea. So somebody comes in, they have a brilliant idea, manage to get secure, either they bring their own funding or they secure funding, and they build up a company. And hopefully they build up a company so that actually stays in Canada and doesn't just move to the United States. Well, that's probably less likely these days, but that it really contributes to the building up of Canada. So that's my lay understanding. There's probably more sophisticated ones, but that's sort of my take on what success would be: number of employees higher, annual revenue, and sustained growth.
Continuity, because with entrepreneurship, one thing that we say, fail fast. It's okay to fail, like you got to fail a couple of times before you start something successful.
A bit louder, I couldn't quite hear that.
I said with entrepreneurs, we're saying fail fast because continuity is something that we really care about when it comes to entrepreneurship, right? Nobody gets their first business right, or a very few people get that. But revenue,
but then you have to sort of say, okay, yes, it's true. A lot of entrepreneurs fail. And then the question is, if you're in Ümit's former shoes and doing an evaluation, you sort of say, okay, we will view success if 50% of the people succeed, means the program's working, just for the sake of argument. So you have to sort of, or if you're evaluating it over a longer period of time, they fail once, do they fail again? That's the kind of thing. I don't think, I still think in terms of success, it's really somebody who goes on, builds up a company or several companies, and demonstrates a track record, not over a reasonable period of time, which would probably be 5 years. You'd expect to have some idea of how well it's working after 5 years.
So let's take what Andrew is saying as the metrics. Let's assume it's more sophisticated than that. We can refine later. But let's take those metrics: revenue, continuity, longevity of the business. And Ümit, I want to take you to Professor Lay's paper, because I think in 2003, and I think that formed the foundation of this negative perception about business immigration. So in that paper, Lay looks at employment earning. If we're talking about revenue for an entrepreneur, is it wise to look at the data for their employment earning? And then when we say, hey, they're not showing that much employment earning, therefore the program is failing, and IRCC, because that's what Lay is basically arguing in that paper, they're saying, hey, look at the employment earning, they're not high, they're less than the average, so IRCC is exaggerating the success in their report. Do you find that reasonable? Is that a correct data point if revenue, for example, is a metric?
No, I agree that it is problematic. And sometimes, I don't want to bore you with more detailed, kind of performance measurement, data availability, those kind of questions. Sometimes you get what you have, right? So you have data on employment earnings, so you look at that and it comes out, very low, but that indicator may not be almost, in fact, even relevant or able to measure that particular activity. So I remember actually another evaluation around 2013-14 on the business immigration. I haven't looked at it recently, but that's where those type of findings were coming out in terms of employment earnings for entrepreneurs low, but is that an indicator of their failure? So then the question becomes, how do you design at the very beginning when you're designing the program? How are you going to assess it? And we go back to the original question of success. I always call it success, but at the same time, it's the promise, because you're spending really as a public servant or as a department, as a deputy minister or minister, when you're launching a program, it's a public promise because you're going to spend public funds and you're promising certain results as public good. Now, what is it that those results you are, promising with those expenditures or investments, let's say, for the public that you're going to make? So lack of clarity, I'm just giving you hint in terms of a particular failure that repeats itself, not only in business immigration, but in many other policy areas, is that failure to clearly define your promise to the public and be able to measure it. That means be ready to measure it. That means you need to have access. Now, we have made Canada, anyway, public service has made big progress in terms of generating better and better data sources. Now, when you can look at more recent evaluations and research, even see better data addressing. But going back to goes back to the success. Yes. But you can count how many employments have been created or generated by the business. You can measure the employment revenue of those individuals who have worked for the business. You can measure in terms of business capital investments and growth in terms of it. You can even measure these days, if you are well prepared, the productivity of that particular business, either total.
So that's assuming we have the data, because you mentioned something very interesting. You say you get what you have, but I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we have all the data we want, but they're just in data jails. And I think IRCC is one of the biggest data jails that I've ever seen in my life, right? I mean, don't we have the data? Can we not technically connect business registration data to the principal applicant? This principal applicant came, how many businesses is he connected to? Then look at the corporate tax filing of those businesses instead of going after himself and seeing if he has any employment earnings. So the question I'm asking is really, first of all, do we have the data, or do we have to get the data, or just free the data?
Okay. So again, you have to kind of take this with a grain of salt. But back in 2013, when that particular business immigration evaluation was done, we didn't have that data. The data probably existed at that time, even in Canada, but we didn't have that data. Now, fast forward now 12, 13 years later, we do have that data. One of the most important data holdings is called CEED, CE, Canadian Economic Employer-Employee Dynamic Data. It is at StatScan, and it connects a huge amount of immigration data, very micro level data, with both business data and tax data. And that is the one that's actually being used these days. If you look at the SUV evaluation I mentioned, you will see that all of their evaluation is based on that. So what I'm trying to suggest is that 10, 12 years ago, we weren't able, even if we were able to properly theorize and conceptualize what success is and how that behavior we would like to see evolve, the entrepreneur behavior, we couldn't measure it. But I don't even suggest that we were able to conceptualize it. But today, I think there is more progress. We are able to conceptualize it, but we are still finding out that there are design issues. I'm referring to that last evaluation I mentioned, SUV, design issues, integrity issues, because the relationship between all the players, especially SUV, small program, but there are so many players, you know better than I do, probably. And there are integrity issues at that level. And not only integrity, but there are capacity issues at the government end to properly monitor and intervene and fix. So, you know, the loop back, what they call, you know, like, what do they call it? The loop back from performance measurement, finding out issues, finding out gaps.
Yeah,
and
there is no feedback loop. There is no feedback loop.
The feedback loop is not working.
Yeah.
It's not triggering any fixes at the design level, right? And this is all acknowledged in the study as well, in this last study. So I guess what I'm trying to suggest, yes, there is data, and if the preparation is done right, and if the design is there, it shouldn't be that difficult to look at entrepreneurs entering Canada, whether on temporary permits. You know, it kind of goes back to, I was listening carefully what Andrew was saying in terms of how do you ensure that during those failures, like you have integrity in the program, right? So temporary worker permit might be triggered, and then the person may, who knows, for 5 years, 10 years, 3 years, continue their business. And that could be in this day and age of AI and everything else and big data, it is possible to, in my view anyway, I'm not saying it's easy, but it is possible to monitor that space based on expected behaviors, again, in terms of business accomplishments or economic outcome accomplishments, and then make the necessary adjustments throughout that time period. There's got to be, I'm not saying lifelong monitoring.
So that's perfect. If I understand you correctly, don't worry about the data. The data is there. Worry about conceptualizing what success looks like. So if I can give you good KPIs, measure this, the data is there and we can measure it. If I say, okay, revenue, track revenue, continue, or if perfect. Now let's go to Andrew. So entrepreneurs, we made some assumptions, and if we make the correct ones, put it in design, we have the techniques to measure it, and then we report back to the public. Now let's go to the investor, because investors are also very interesting. And here's what Professor Lay wrote in his paper, right? So he looked at all the investors and said over 50% of households declared incomes below the poverty level in 1996. He looked at a cohort of Chinese origin groups that landed in Canada between 86 and 96 and say, hey, more than 50% are below poverty level, but they're owning expensive real estate in Vancouver. Right? But then here's another question. If we are bringing in passive investor, we never wanted them from day one. We never asked them to show me income in the country, right? I said, show me the money back then, put it somewhere. I as Canada, I'm just going to earn interest on your money and I will pay back your money. And then, hey, you're a permanent resident and you're here. So then again, there is a mismatch between what we created in design and what we measured. And that measurement became the basis of saying this program is failing. Now, I come to you, Andrew. If we are okay in principle that it's okay to allow passive investors, and passive investor, the definition is there. We don't want you to get engaged with anything actively. If in principle we're okay with them, how do we have to measure them? Like, what's the success of a passive investor program?
Well, I don't see any value to a passive investor program. I just think there's no real value to that, because I think, if you look at immigration in a proper sense, we don't do it because we're a wonderful country. We do it because we want to increase the wealth and the well-being of Canada. I don't really see much benefits from passive investors. There's if you look at sort of the impact of sort of waves of passive investors, you look at the impact on housing prices and stock. Vancouver is a test case. There's been a lot of studies on that impact. And yes, you have a nice Robson Street luxury boutiques, but it's not really generating wealth for the country. And of course, when we look at tax data, of course, expensive homes, but no real tax revenue. Passive, I think, for your perspective in business immigration, focus on the ones that actually can contribute to the Canadian economy, can build up the economy, can build some companies. But the passive investors, I don't see any business case for it.
Okay, perfect. Let's unpack that. One thing that you said, the real estate argument is a very, very interesting one. Okay, and I want to really unpack it. When they declared a ban on foreign buyers, there were studies that said only 2% of foreigners are buying real estate in Canada. So it's like a very easy scapegoat, right? Like saying, don't buy expensive real estate is like saying, oh, you're a doctor, you can afford homes, don't buy it because like it increases the value. Why are we blaming investor immigrants? That's one thing. Like it can't be what happened to Vancouver. It just can't be because of the investor stream, right? The Chinese student, the Iranian student who came, and then the parents came, and then they give them money that they bought the real estate. It's not just, it's not.
Well, I'm pretty convinced by some of the analysis you see coming out of Vancouver by Andy Yen, David Lay, and others, because I think they've sort of effectively indicated through their empirical-based studies that there was a significant impact in Vancouver real estate prices. And so I think that's the convincing thing, because again, yes, it doesn't cover all the reasons for increased housing costs and everything like that. Absolutely. But you can't discount it either, because it does seem to have had a disproportionate one. And that's, I'm not the expert here, but when I listen to the experts like David Lay, et cetera, I'm pretty convinced by their analysis.
David Lay, we're going to have him on Catalyst Canada Roundtable in the future. So I'm going to send him the link to this video for sure. Because I'm a big critic of Professor Lay's work, but I want to bring in another interesting thing. Christine Surok, she's a professor at London School of Economics, and she did a study in Europe. And also, we're going to host Professor Surok on the roundtables as well. She did a study and say, okay, Europe has the biggest RBI residency by investment programs in the world. And she did a study there and said investment migration sales account for less than 3%, 3% of real estate transactions in all of those countries that are doing RBI. So basically, she's saying there is a lot more threat than European citizens contributing to the affordability crisis than it is immigrants. And I argue that the situation is very similar in Canada. I mean, the problem, I think, is much bigger than that. Real estate being an asset instead of shelter is not something that is a fault of immigrants, let alone business immigrants. I mean, look at Canada. We remain the only G7 country that have residential real estate investment much more than business investment. Real estate is the go-to choice for investment in Canada. In Toronto and Vancouver, more than 50% of condominiums are owned by investors, and not all of those investors are immigrants, right? It's a Canadian doctor, surgeon, engineer making enough money and just buying investment properties. So I think the real estate argument is more nuanced, to say the least, and we cannot contribute all of it to business immigrants. Ümit, what do you think about this?
Okay, so two things as I'm listening to both of you. I think this very portion of the conversation is pointing at a kind of invisible but very important dimension of this conversation. And I'm going to be very blunt. At the very beginning, you may remember, Siavash, as you came in and, you said, okay, business immigration, so it's economic growth, prosperity, GDP per capita, all that kind of stuff. But all that conversation actually hides another question. Is any kind of economic growth, any kind of GDP per capita going up, is it good for Canada? So I'm going to nuance it. What is more important is that when we say, and that particular question comes so forceful, especially around the passive investor. Is any kind of money, are all kinds of monies coming into Canada under passive investor kind of a portfolio? Are they all the same kind? Well, where does Canada stand as a society in terms of where it wants to see itself 10, 15, 20, 50 years from now? So now I'm going into green environment versus, so you have passive investors coming in, putting their money to go into oil and oil sands and whatever, that kind of an investment. And then there is a new portfolio. I'm the new prime minister and I say, look, I'm going to invest special investment portfolio in entirely green economy. In fact, watching very carefully, not even going for growth, because I also question as an economist, why all this obsession with growth? That's a different issue. We can go, but this is not the topic today, because there are intelligent people discussing, why growth obsession and in fact assumption is actually destroying a lot of other ideas. So then the question comes up. So my difference from Andrew is that I agree and I share his concerns about the passive investors in general, but I want to leave a door open somewhere there. If I can channel the passive investors' capital into something that I believe in Canada is needed. Now you got to bring in your political philosophy and what Canada stands for and whatnot, or many other questions. Even in housing, God, in Canada, there are many housing areas, social housing, affordable housing, where the capital is not really so excited to invest. So in those kind of areas, if I can create portfolios and I can say, passive investors, come on in, bring your funds. And we have now special government, whatever, guaranteed, blah, blah, all kinds of funds. And we're going to invest them in either green, environment-friendly initiatives or create social housing, affordable housing for people who cannot afford shelter. In those instances, now I qualified the story. In those instances, I am all for passive investors. I have no issue.
100%. No, I agree. If we are Canada, right? Imagine the three of us were deciding for Canada. I'm saying, okay, so your problem is not with the money. Your problem is where the money is going. Fantastic. Yes. because we can talk about that and we can have solutions, right? For example, the investor program that we had before was guaranteed. I mean, like it was so lazy in design, right? It was like, put your money in a bank, I'll earn the interest, I'll give you the money back, and you could also loan the money. This is what blows my mind, right? It was before my time. It's like, okay, so I want you to put in $1.6 million, and because it's guaranteed, the banks will loan you 80%, so you're in with 20% of that amount. I'm saying, let's put an investment program. It's at risk, something that we can learn from the EB5 in the US. We create designations. There's a free market. We allow people to become designated, and we say where the at-risk money would go. It's social housing. Let it go to social housing. The investor can choose. They can see the portfolios. They can choose where they want to put in the money, and then we monitor the people who take the money. Because the abusing these programs are really in the world is the people, the intermediaries, the private business. And let's not forget, private business is all for the bottom line, right? To expect anything more from our sector, I think it's just missing one crucial design element, right? We are built by law and by design to go after bottom line, right? So with that in mind, I just have to put good checks and balances to make sure that where the money goes, it's getting the value that I want. Andrew, do you agree with this? So we're not anti-money, we're not anti-investment. We're just saying where it goes and there are solutions.
Well, I guess I would come at it with a different angle. Like, I have a certain skepticism about the government being able to manage these kind of complex programs, enforce regulations and everything like that. I mean, I've always called for a certain degree of policy model. That there's a limit to what government can do and a limit to what government can do effectively and efficiently. So, in theory, it all sounds wonderful. But, again, maybe I've spent too many years in government, but you sort of say there are limits to what we can do effectively. And the more complex and the more sophisticated the approach, the harder it is to monitor it effectively. I mean, in a real-time basis. I mean, the evaluations that departments do are generally of high quality and they're really insightful. How well they're implemented is another matter. But that's the note of caution, is that if you're developing this kind of super sophisticated approach, which makes sense on a theoretical level and on, a potential evidence-based level, the challenge is that government priorities change, people move on, and the quality of tracking, monitoring, and everything like that just is really hard to maintain. So that would be that's an important caveat to my mind. It doesn't mean it's not a valid idea.
Yeah.
But it's just like, can we do it? And there's so many failures in government,
Because that's a perfect segue for my next conversation.
Can I just interject very quickly?
Of course, anytime you want.
I totally share. In fact, I will double it in terms of my trust in the public service government being able to do this, something like that properly. I've been very recently really looking at the pension funds very closely. There have been a couple of significant, strong civil society organizations actually examining Canadian public pension funds. There is a number of them, provincial and like a public service pension fund. There's a CPP, and how they are being managed. Very recently, only a couple of months ago, solid, fully evidence-based report card looking at all Canadian public pension funds, a dozen of them, very carefully, in detail, evidence-based, holding them against a number of indicators ranging from Paris Agreement to Canadian commitments and all that. And the CPP and the Public Service Pension Fund, both of them fail miserably. I can send you their report card. I mean, they are at the very bottom. Quebec is doing better in some of them. But now, the reason I'm giving this example, it speaks so loudly in terms of what I heard from Andrew. And here are so what I was suggesting with the passive investor is almost like a pension fund. You create a fund and you say this fund is going to invest in such areas, great areas, respectful of environment, electricity grid, right? The grid from west to east. Some of the suggestions coming out these days in terms of Trump tariffs. But then I'm looking at these two pension funds, and they are really not doing so well in terms of what Canada seems to care about, which is the environment.
No, because it's all the bottom line, right? I mean, like ESG
You said
investment
it.
doesn't.
Exactly.
Of course, it's the reality. Like we
But
can't
then,
hide it.
Siavash,
That's the elephant in the room. It's so big,
Okay.
right? Like it's a race to the bottom line.
Don't misunderstand me. I'm going to use this term very respectfully, especially for your colleagues and everybody. How do we tame the capital's urge, that bottom line urge, with public good interest? That's to me.
That's why we have government. That's why we have government, for God's sake. That is exactly why we have government. That is as much as this government is frustrating me, like every day, like I'm a practicing lawyer and I cannot begin to tell you how frustrated I am with how my tax dollar is being spent right now, right? But despite that, I remain a true believer in the power of government to tame that. Exactly that. So that's why we need good government. And that's why we're having this conversation. And Andrew, thank you very much, because this is the segue to what I wanted to talk about, right? Who is in charge of this design? Who is in charge of this monitoring? Who is in charge of giving us the best shot at a workable immigration framework? Well, that's at the federal level is IRCC. And I want to open ourselves to the Yates report. Like that is giving us a very blunt look at what's happening in this $6.5 billion department. It literally says IRCC is broken. Our $6.5 billion goes to a department that based on its own internal report is broken. And why is it broken? Why is it broken? I mean, the report is there. Let's talk about that. Because if we want to fix this, this needs to start from fixing the IRCC. Because if IRCC is not fixed, the only option that I think is actually the best on the table is bypass. Like we can do institutional bypass and we create public-private partnership models that we can bypass the IRCC till we fix it. But let's put that aside. Let's talk about the IRCC. Let's talk about the Yates report. I mean, like, do you think there is any hope for fixing this department, Andrew?
Well, it's a large department. The issues are complex. The interface between what the political level wants and what the officials believe makes sense quite often vary. And in one sense, immigration policy is a bit like tax policy, in the sense that every little wrinkle or program that you see in immigration reflects some political or other pressure. Just as when you look at, it's tax season, right? We're going through our tax returns. It's a very complex process because every little measure ranging from the digital services tax to your safety deposit deduction, those are the small ones, reflects some lobby group putting that. So I think the challenge goes beyond just IRCC and management and the Yates report. I think it goes beyond sort of what do we really want from immigration? Do we really need an outside group, whether it be a royal commission or something else, to really sort of take a hard look at the 100+ programs and almost do a program review and say, can we drastically simplify the immigration programs? Because you can't really effectively do reorganization and AI unless you actually do a certain simplification of programs and everything like that. It's just too complex. You look at all the
But there is nothing we cannot solve. I mean, like there is. Maybe that's the engineer in me talking. There is no complex problem. I don't think there are
a lot of things we can't solve. I mean, unfortunately, that's the reality because we tend to bite off more than we can chew. The politicians, government is always about addition. It's very rare about subtraction, except when you have a rigorous program review exercise, which I think, we're long overdue. I mean, I personally think we need a royal commission on immigration, even if it takes the time, because we need that sort of distance from all the day-to-day pressures, which is really hard to manage, especially I'm not even sure that it's how possible it is in today's environment because people have too much pressure to do things quickly. But we do things quickly. We do things on an ad hoc basis. They're not completely poorly thought out. It's not, I'm saying that, but it just becomes, you keep on adding layers and layers of complexity. And it becomes harder and harder to manage complexity. So you need more and more layers of managers to manage the complexity. And it just spirals out of control. So I think that's the main issue for me. I mean, Ümit, you may have further thoughts on that or may disagree with me, but I just think that's a really fundamental challenge. And it doesn't apply to immigration only, it applies to government as well.
Ümit, what do you think? Is there any hope for IRCC?
Well, first of all, I agree with almost everything Andrew said, but I want to add some more layers to that. First of all, number one, and Andrew kind of hinted at it, Yates' report. Well, first of all, the report came out. You may not know, and then an org change was put in place. I don't know. I think I'm just going to make numbers. Don't quote me on this, but maybe there were 7, 8 ADMs. Now all of a sudden the department had 17 ADMs, and you can compare org charts if you like. Doesn't matter. And then there was, of course, with all due respect to Neil Yates, whom I respect a lot. He was one of the DMs that I worked most closely, and I have a lot of respect for to this day. But what he proposed was an org change to me. And of course, he probably knew that maybe there will be some culture, because it's not an innocent org change because it kind of changed the underlying organizational structure. However, there are a lot of, and this is where I'm adding a little more to what Andrew said, there are a lot of culture issues and practices, traditions of practices that Yates' report could not have changed, because that wasn't its purview. In a sense, even the deputy minister who received the Neil Yates report and started the org change, she didn't stay there until the org change was implemented. She left right away. She's gone somewhere else. And another deputy minister came in to continue implementing it, and they never finished it because they keep org changing all the time. There are new org changes almost every year. So the Yates report, don't think from outside that it came in and it solved the problems. So now, if I can say a couple more things very quickly, exactly on this topic. So you might say, well, if it wasn't Yates' report, but it was Ümit's report, what would you do? Okay, you could do some org changes if it is needed, yes. But there are other fundamental failures to the department, or not to the department itself, in fact, to the public service. First of all, number one, the policy ideas or program design, whatever, they really are coming mostly, in my view, from echo chambers, special interest groups and whatnot, not necessarily from bottom up, from the staff who are working on the design of these programs. The second one is, we talked about it, the evidence oftentimes is poor, but it's getting better, but the evidence is not being heard. There are no ears. I keep using this reference, back to some Greek philosophers, but there are no ears to listen to these evidence. So therefore, failures are following, and the intersecting policy domains. You said, like at the very beginning, introducing this portion of the conversation, you said, well, IRCC can do it. Well, IRCC cannot, because IRCC doesn't manage housing. IRCC doesn't manage healthcare. IRCC doesn't manage many other domains that are intersecting and interacting, if you will, with immigration. In fact, to tell you the truth, when you look at the SUV policy, SUV evaluation that I mentioned, and this is very important in my view for business immigration, advocates, if you will, they need to realize that IRCC is an amateur in that business. I know my colleagues. I know the department. The department is not even nearly close like EDC, Export Development Canada, right? So why not to create another something like that, if you're really interested in business development, create it as a Business Development Canada, and have that, partly dedicated to helping the business investors coming into Canada as immigrants. So in a sense, IRCC doesn't have the capacity, intelligence, knowledge to manage programs. Let's say in this case, we are talking about business immigration, and in other instances as well. And this is not a criticism of IRCC at all. These are specialty issues. If we had an something like an EDC, but looking at investment in Canada, and imagine that organization actually managing programs like SUV, IRCC can still pull the immigration, IRPA responsibilities, put them on the table, but another organization could manage them, who know what investment is about, what economic development is about. IRCC doesn't know what economic development is. IRCC processes visas and applications. That's where what it is good at. So I'm trying to say that, there are, and of course, I'm not going to even go to the poverty of, having the indicators and the data, monitoring. We talked about it, the learning loop. And so in all those domains, the department, just like most of the other departments is also failing. So because it's failing in those domains, it's failing to go and correct the program design elements so that it can get all those lofty policy objectives that at the very beginning, the department is always very good at publicly announcing. Most of those, nobody can disagree with many of the policy objectives spelled out, but the devil is in the detail. So that's what I'm thinking. So in a sense, Neil Yates' report could not have or wasn't even meant to fix all these things. It was an org change that is still continuing, unfortunately.
But to the public, it was a good reflection of what's happening inside.
Sure.
Right? I mean, like one part of the Yates report that is of particular interest to me, and you did mention it right now, echo chambers, right? It's like, it says, was observed that most of the actual decision-making occurs in the DMO/ADM bylaw. So nobody's listening to the body of the IRCC with that limited expertise, right? Even that limited expertise is not being listened to. So decision-making is so political. And as a Canadian, I'm really pissed off at this because my $6.5 billion is at risk and is at the hands of a very few. Because look at the immigration policy at large. I mean, like economic immigration policy at large is only benefiting lazy employers and terrible colleges. Like this is it. Like look at the international student. What happened? 800 something thousand international students contributing $22 billion to the economy, and now bring in 3,000 investors at $2 million each. It's like, it's 60 billion there for you. I mean, consultation is not there within IRCC, let alone, because we are a signatory. I forgot the name of that UN treaty that we are a signatory of, but it's a very famous clause in there. It says immigration is not only a whole of government approach, requires not only a whole of government approach, but it requires a whole of a society approach. I'm saying, forget about whole of government. The government itself, one tiny department in the bigger government, is not talking to itself. How do you want this government to talk about other federal governments? And how do you want this to go and coordinate with the provinces? And this is why we have a lot of these mismatches. So this is what I'm offering. It seems from both of you, with all those experience at IRCC, I'm not seeing hope that this system can be fixed. What about a bypass? I mean, like Ümit, you just, alluded to it. What if I just bypass IRCC, create something else for business immigration, and, I can self-fund it? Just do a RFP to the private sector, and I can, the private sector can design Canada, the state-of-the-art bypassed business immigration pathway with very, very solid reporting.
Like maybe build a crown corporation or something like that. Doesn't matter. I mean, the only issue that in your suggestion would be is how do you integrate public eyes into that design, right? How do you ensure that design that you just suggested? So it has to be a trusted design where you have the public good eyes and the creativity, innovation of the experts of that field. I'm no expert on crown corporations, like Andrew would know 10 times better than I do, but like EDC, I'm not sure. Is it a successful one? Is it really growing Canada's exports and whatnot? But as an example, I know it's a complex organization, it's a global organization. The reason I keep going back to it is that a similar one as a crown corporation or some other kind of like what you mentioned as a kind of public-private organization, dedicated but with experts and whatnot, with the public assurance that it's the public good is the driving force, can do the bypass that you're mentioning. I mean, to me, it's not an anathema. It could work, but I don't know, Andrew.
Well, I mean, I think the thing is that, so you do a bypass. The bypass still has to interact with IRCC, other organizations. The bypass also has to consider, is there going to be an adverse impact in terms of healthcare, housing, etc.? Can it be more efficient having it a bit outside, or is it better to have it inside? Like the basic argument is if you have a smaller dedicated organization, it can focus on its mandate more clearly than if it's just part of IRCC. It gets lost in the swamp of IRCC program. But I don't think it addresses the fundamental need. You still have to have the connections to the rest of government, the rest of society, so that it doesn't help there. But the example that might be more interesting to look at, like EDC is one example, but maybe it's BDC, the Business Development Corp. I mean, we all see their ads, they're wonderful ads. But another element of my cynicism is I'm just not sure that government is really effective in working with business. and in terms of economic development. I think it gets, I mean, I'm not
But how do
saying
we
that
change that, Andrew? How do we change that? Because here's the thing. I think the problem.
that's a big question, but maybe it's just one of those things that it's just you have to recognize that we're just not very good at that. And so, Ümit tends to be a bit left of center. I tend to be a bit right of center. So I'm sort of
Take your point that government.
I tend to think that the role for government in terms of economic development, in terms of assisting individual companies, I'm just not convinced that we have that expertise anywhere in government. EDC, because it's specialized in export finance, I think, they may be exception, but all of these economic development, the regional development agencies, they're basically responding, I think, more to political pressures and business lobbying than they are in terms of taking a systematic approach to economic development. So I'm a bit more, it reflects my bias that I haven't seen very much evidence that these really work, and they play an important role in the political process and regional support and everything like that. So, but getting back to my point, if you take it, put it in a separate box, it might work. But what I would say is that before you go down there, look at the startup visa. Look at some of the lessons you're getting from that. And then you have to ask your question, as a separate organization, would that improve startup visa program in terms of outcomes, however defined and everything like that? Or would it not make a difference? And the last note I'd make is, like Ümit, I've been through a number of reorganizations, governmental reorganizations. And you really have to be careful to ensure that the expected results outweigh the costs, the transition costs, over the 2 to 3 year period, because every reorganization that I've been through, it just throws a whole monkey wrench and is very disruptive, and it actually can impede the actual delivery of the objective. So I never against reorganization in principle, but my general sense is try to make things work within an existing organization, because a reorganization sometimes is just used to camouflage more fundamental issues within a department.
Let us go back. Ümit, I want to come to you with this. This is very interesting, and it's not just an immigration problem. Government not being able to work with business. I mean, these are the silos. I mean, we are in this mess because of the very silos, right? If we can't work together, right, our collective, in my opinion, my personal opinion, we're declining on the collective. We're losing the art of being able to work together, challenge each other, remain respectful at the same time, agree to disagree, and then agree on trying out together. Andrew, you raised a very good question. What do we want from immigration? What we want from immigration is we want to be able to test it, learn from it, test it again, learn from it, refine. No answer is ever perfect. But what is perfect is our ability to be able to come together. I mean, here's the thing, lobbyists make policy, lobbyists go to the minister's office, and now we have the government. I'm at the executive of 2 lawyer associations in this country, and I can tell you I can't tell you enough about the mistrust that exists between government listening to us with good ideas about how they can improve their service delivery. Why is that? Where is that mistrust coming from? They're not even meeting with us. I mean, my solution to all of these problems with government, I put glass doors everywhere. Make it transparent and it kind of solves itself. Well, it's radical at the moment. We're good at talking about it, but that's a start. Put glass doors everywhere and then invite the public to come and give you the opinion. Not everything you hear is smart. Not everything you hear, of course, is frustrating. It's not easy. But right now, it's a few making decisions for millions. How can we change that? I mean, because this goes, this is a root cause, right? But we got to start from somewhere.
No, I wish I knew that. But just all I would do is I would make the plea that keep in mind that experience that you just described in this country, a lot of organizations I know and I work very closely with, like refugee organization, affordable housing, healthcare, Canada Health Coalition and others. There are many other organizations, not coming from the business angle, but from other social needs angle. They are experiencing the same thing. So they are also hitting the black hole. They are not getting that access access or those ears that you are complaining about not finding. So there is definitely a challenge at that level. So that requires maybe more reforms. I think even during my lifetime, I have seen the public service, government maybe, but I mean public service become more open, well, more diverse in itself, but also a little more transparent, not so very transparent. I personally pushed a lot, and Andrew knows this, for open data, for instance. I know you mentioned data is locked in, but used to be like that, I swear to you. I mean, I'm not just saying it I'm not talking about myself, but my team, we worked very hard to make IRCC data public, and there have been day and night in terms of course, working with SASCAN, with provinces and everything else. Also, by the way, let's not forget provinces in this solution that you're kind of designing, I'm sure in your mind, like in that creative, maybe future different worlds, possible worlds. Obviously, provinces will have to play a very strong role in terms of the business angle. I personally always, cautiously optimistic kind of approach. I think it's possible, but it needs to be owned, the problem, by, I guess, senior public service. I don't know how much you heard about him, or you listen or you read about him, but Alex Himmelfarb, do you know him, Siavash?
Well, I think I'm recently in love with him, because I saw that. I don't know. I just watched 2 lectures and I'm like, okay, why didn't I know this guy earlier? Okay. And you know how I knew him? Because you liked or something, you commented on one of his posts. And I'm like, oh my God, this guy has a lot to say.
The reason I jumped on is, I don't know him. I never met him, but I read him, religiously. And the reason he was, Andrew got to tell us about, because he worked under him. I don't think I did, but he was a clerk. So this mind that today you can read and follow, and with all his criticism and his solutions and how Canada should be moving forward, he was the clerk, he was the highest public servant in our lifetime. So in a sense, the vision, and I'm sure there are many other Alexes today in the public service or in the government. So in terms of, that's why that keeps my hope high in terms of possible change and, proper design to balance, in your case, the business interest, let's say, business interest, not selfish interest, but selfish plus the public good end of business outcomes, and also the public good, in terms of the brakes and the controls. And I'm not talking about hardcore regulations, but I'm talking in terms of a public good type of a lens that looks after the Canadian society, economy today, and many generations down the line. And that's another issue that we always forget. You mentioned sustainability, continuity when it comes to entrepreneurship. The continued decisions we make today, they influence 10, 15, whatever, 30, 40 years, our children and grandchildren's lives. So in that respect, I am hopeful it can happen, but there needs to be a recognition that there is a problem first, which I guess maybe 3 of us are agreeing a little bit, but I'm not sure how much this is shared at higher levels. I don't know, Andrew, am I too optimistic?
Maybe I'm too pessimistic, so maybe we balance each out that way. Well, I think there are some bright lights. Alex is a really interesting character in that sense, because he's been at the highest level, but he always had a former academic background. Whereas if you look at sort of the last previous clerk, Michael Warnick, who's doing a lot of public commentary and very useful ones on sort of organizational issues and culture issues. So I think there is a lot of that kind of thought at senior levels. The question I think that they face is, they're inherently, a lot of them are deep thinkers, but they have to manage the beast and they have to manage the political level. And so they tend to be more reactive than proactive. There are some exceptions. So I think that's one of the challenges that the public service faces, because there's just so much going on. There's so much bandwidth. And the other challenge, I think, is the whole public service, which Daniel Savoy and others have written about, is that anytime you talk about public service reform, you effectively run against the problem that to do that requires a lot of time and energy. And it has virtually no political interest. So you can't really get effective political buy-in to do a major revamp of the public service, because it doesn't attract votes. And so deputy ministers, no matter how much they may want to do change, and ADMs, they'll be constrained in terms of how much buy-in they can get at the public, at the political level. And you certainly, you really need, in one sense, for the clerk or that level to sort of say, we actually do need a Royal Commission on the Public Service. Don't worry, it's going to report for the next government. So you're not going to wear it. You just set it in motion, and then if you're reelected, well, you're going to have to deal with it. But because I think there's no shortage of brain power within the public service at senior levels. But I think just getting that space to actually have that kind of conversation that involves both people who know government and people who are outside government, because you don't need a Doge kind of exercise done by, autistic idiots, like Elon Musk.
That's an interesting, that's an interesting point. Let's not conflate Doge with Musk. Doge principally is a good idea, okay? This is like if an idiot is in front of a good idea, let's not make that idea bad. But what you're, Andrew, saying is basically you're root causing everything to the political system. The problem is the political system, right? And we have to change that, I guess, because that's public. No politician would like to change government, because if government is good, the less we have a need for a politician, right? I mean, like in an ideal world, if government is perfect, why do we need politicians? What are they adding, right? So if we want, because here's what's the reality of it. We are right now in an election campaign, right? You see these people knocking on doors. When they get elected and they become a minister, good luck finding them. Good luck being able to talk to them, like that power, that chair, that, the kind of arrogance that all of a sudden it brings. I think we need to change that. And we business, public servants, we have to come together to be able to change that. Because silos are actually working in their favor. If we are not having this conversation, if we're not finding this common ground, then how can we expect the politician to change? He wins or she wins the right to govern, then everything is forgotten, and then next 20 years, another Yates would say, hey, this structure was put in place 40 years ago, nothing has changed other than expectation.
Siavash, can I say something as I'm listening to you? I share your frustration, because I have worked many years after I immigrated to Canada, before I joined public service, in the civil society. I worked for First Nations and for the civil society NGOs, including Assembly of First Nations and whatnot. And I have always seen the public service government, you say, from the other side of the table. And I share your frustration, not from a business angle, but similar frustration. But having said that, I just want to put something on the table. I know you may not like this maybe, or your viewers. Although you're complaining in terms of business not having access to the government, actually there are many voices in Canada, academic and whatnot, and I am kind of one of them as well. In some way, actually, government is listening to business interests, they would say, a lot more than the civil society or the, let's say, people who can't find affordable housing and the refugee claimants and all that kind of stuff. And people would say, and there are, tons of, obviously, volumes of documentation and whatnot, that the government, in fact, is under the influence of business interest. Now, it
not
may
like this, Ümit. Not like this. Because this is recorded. We're putting it out there. This is not lobbying, right? The kind of business interest that government looks for is behind closed doors, paid lobbyists saying, this is...
Okay. You heard where I'm coming from. I hope you don't misunderstand me. I mean, there is a strong argument out there that, in a sense, the business has the government's ear. Those echo chambers that we're talking about, it's not the refugee leaders or people who are fighting for the rights of temporary foreign workers who are in those echo chambers. In those echo chambers, there are a certain group of people. So therefore, in a sense, business, perhaps maybe not your organizations, but perhaps business is already very close to the government. And maybe some of the problems are because of that. Now, I'm just putting these as ideas. It's not the time and place to discuss these things to death. And I don't want to, monopolize it with that angle. But I'm just putting it there so that I guess the last word on this is that given perhaps, Andrew hinted at that, maybe Trump 2.0, given the economic challenges right now that Canada is facing, I'm not, facing, and is going to overcome them, perhaps it is the time to rethink business immigration and business, immigration from a business lens, and really truly rethink, not just in terms of, how many seats in the levels plan, but it's more structural rethink is needed, perhaps a la EDC or some other kind of a way of bypassing. It's not bypass, sounds a little scary, creating this kind of arm's length but expert organization, running it more impactfully and transparently, right? That kind of stuff. Maybe this is the best time, really, with elbows up and everything else. Maybe you're onto something.
Andrew, what are your thoughts? Because business, I agree with Ümit. Like, I'm not counter-arguing this. Business has the years. Business is a running government, but not the kind of business we're talking about. I mean, let's go back to the immigration system. Which are the businesses that are winners of this immigration system? You know how many days a week somebody walks into my office and says, my employer is abusing me because I'm in a closed work permit? I hear those stories, that's a burden on my shoulder. Who's the winner of that? The kind of business that goes behind closed doors. Here's my argument. All the lobbying sessions should be recorded like this, transparent. I click and I hear what they're saying. We're not scared of what we're saying, but we're putting behind the table, yes, our self-interest as business people are served, but we're so confident that Canada's interests are also served if we do what we're claiming to do. This small business is not going to win if this country becomes the land of entrepreneurs, because entrepreneurs create competition and big business doesn't like competition. This is reality, and I understand that, and I take it to heart because that is exactly what's happening. I mean, look at the explosion of the international student program. Who benefited from that? Did Canadian education benefit from that? Did the poor international student who came here with a Canadian dream sold to them by an intermediary only to commit suicide under a bridge? I mean, these are headlines. These are not fantasy, right? And where is the root of that? Because government is not government, politicians, they're just good at playing a game, and that's it. So we have to open this up. And I think it should start with public service. Public service should proactively go out and say, hey, we know that this one lobby group, that one lobby group have the years of the ADM, but I, as the body of this IRCC, I'll open it up. I'll make an invitation, come to this table. Like the Yates report is saying, is that they already have committees of 25 people, so if you have the budget, you can facilitate this conversation and you can open this up to collaboration. Because if we don't unite, and by we is somebody who has the ingenuity to understand that self-interest is not sustainable and it's collective interest that is sustainable. So if we can spread that mentality and we bring those people together, and we're not scared of transparency. Here's the thing, we're having this conversation, it's recorded, it's for the public to see. So that's my argument. I'm saying, how can we use the public service to be more open to this kind of a collaboration? Is there room with what I'm reading in the Yates report? I mean, the culture stuff that he's saying here is the culture, the default culture in IRCC is I don't want change. And I kind of understand that. But is there hope, Andrew, do you think? Is there hope that at least the collective mind can somehow come together to make sure that we all help to bring us out of this?
That's a hard one. Let me try another little tack in the context of Trump 2.0. So what has been interesting and what has created a real opportunity is the Trump crackdown on academic funding. So you see U of T and other universities really trying to attract the top flight researchers, academic, and they're getting fantastic, some people who I don't know personally, but who are really sort of experts. Think about the business community now. Who are the people they want to attract? So, so rather than sort of, excuse the expression, passively waiting for people to knock on your doors, why don't you see if you can start a conversation with the business community? Who are the top people in the U.S. who, for whatever reason, might be considering moving back to Canada and bring some resources? I think that's it. I don't know how it would work, and there are lots of issues there.
That's a fantastic question.
Pardon?
That's a fantastic question. The problem is the business community doesn't want competition. You're a lawyer.
I mean, I wouldn't be quite so cynical on that, because in one sense, a large company that doesn't want competition might be interested in poaching somebody from a U.S. company, and that could still benefit Canada.
Sure, but that's not entrepreneurship. That's not. See, here's a problem.
But let's get back to the fundamental objective. We want to improve the Canadian economy. We want to improve Canadian society.
And nothing improves an economy better than entrepreneurship, better than that kind of a resilience. But business community
I think you try and do both. And so, what do you do in Silicon Valley? So, are there people there who want to move back to Canada? Probably there are some. Will they do that just because the Trump environment is so negative? I'm not so sure of that yet, but look at those kinds of pools of people who don't necessarily, if you build it, they will come, is one, you actually sort of say, who would actually benefit from recruiting some top flight business executive, researchers that could improve, because in one sense, you want to serve, this may be an opportunity to partially reverse some of the brain drain that has characterized Canadian emigration for many, many years. So it's just a thought, because I think there's an interesting parallel there that is worthwhile exploring, and it may also play into another narrative that we're sort of bringing people back, and we're seeing that in the medical area as well.
No, that's a fantastic analogy per se, but like the problem with business is. Here's why entrepreneurship, I think, needs government intervention, because what business wants is cheap labor that it can abuse. Let's talk pure bottom line, right? Like if I'm an employer, strictly bottom line oriented, I'm like, yeah, give me an employee. He's a PhD, but because he's an immigrant, I can abuse him. The running salary for this guy with this kind of talent is $100K. I'm going to pay him $70K. And I say, if you don't work Sundays, I'm going to cancel your work permit. This is happening on the ground. This is happening right now on a daily basis with the genuine workers. And half the other market is fraud. There's no company. It's all fake LMIAs. It's all of that. It's abuse. So that's why this government kind of we need a mix of game theory, system design that kind of makes sure that all interests are there. It's a complicated question for sure. I'm not saying this is an easy problem to solve. But this is a problem that requires a lot of wisdom. And I go back to what Andrew is saying, and I am a true believer of that. I don't think we have shortage of brain in our country, not only just in the public sector, in the government, but also in the private sector, in business, in academia. That's our best attempt. Catalyst Canada is basically that's what we're doing, right? We're bringing people together. And with a tiny problem, business immigration is honestly a tiny problem. Although I argue if you do it right, it will change this country around. Because look, what do you think built the US? If it was not entrepreneurship, if it was not nothing else built that country but entrepreneurship. But in Canada, we do everything we can just to make sure that we keep this market as small and as exclusively as practically possible in business. I mean, it's everywhere. It's wireless, it's banking. We're not famous for competition. And if you're not famous for competition, there's no entrepreneurship. There's no entrepreneurship. It's just a few businesses running a big country. And here we are in this mess, the big guy who wants to eat us alive. But hey, that's another roundtable. That's another issue, I guess. For now, I'm happy that I had you on this table. The last thing I want to ask you, how can you help with what we're doing? If you think in principle this is possible, if you think this is an exercise worth doing, how can we count on your help?
Well, I'll just jump in, Andrew. I mean, from my end, as long as I believe, which in this case I definitely believe in the goodwill to create some greater public good, I'm there to, if you have ideas, I can comment, I can look at them, honest to God, with whatever, added value I can bring to the table. I don't mind doing that. This is a volunteer thing, in terms of putting, and I can recommend who to hook up, into the equation, because you need the best brains to bring onto solutions that are being generated, if you will. Those kind of things, I can definitely try to chip in. Yeah,
we couldn't ask for more. We couldn't ask for more. Andrew, can we get that?
Well, Ümit, the same thing.
Perfect. Well, guys, thank you honestly very, very much. I'm just going to give you one last word if you have anything to add to this conversation, and I think that's a wrap. So, Andrew, any final thoughts?
I'm good.
Ümit?
Yeah, my only thing is thank you very much for an honest, open, stimulating conversation. It was so good also to have Andrew. It's a trusted colleague, friend, so that I could share my thoughts as they emerged, let's say.
Well, perfect. Thank you again on behalf of the Business Immigration Committee and on behalf of the bigger CILA family. Thank you very, very, very much for giving us your time and your patience and, of course, your insights. This will go in the record for the history. And I hope, this continues and we can accomplish something for the Canada that we all so love so much.